I am Betty Winsch. The inspiration for the program, an armchair tour of historic Westerleigh, was the book Westerleigh, Yesterday and Today, written in 1980 by Victoria Barrack, illustrated by Susan Bavaro, and published by the Westerleigh Improvement Society. The original live presentation was presented by Victoria Barrack and me in October 1983, with narration by Vicky and photos by Betty. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoy the program. The original program was hosted by the Women's Association of Emmanuel Union Church, with invited guests attending. The audience for the program filled the Fellowship Hall of Emmanuel. The program was also presented in May 1984 at the annual meeting of the Westerleigh Improvement Society. Subsequently, the Armchair Tour was also presented to 4 other civic groups between 1983 and 1987. This is a new digitally formatted copy of the original program. An effort has been made to include most of the original 35mm slides and text as it was presented in 1984, though some facts have been updated and several newly obtained historic images have been added to this digital video version in 2014. I would like to thank Mark Anderson, who has assisted me to make edits and updates and has digitized the presentation, and also thank Mike Morrell for his assistance and support. I am narrating this digital version from Vicki Barrack's original notes. Sadly, Vicki passed away August 22nd, 1995. We have a large variety of images to show you in our armchair tour of historic Westerleigh. The story begins with the oldest residence in Westerleigh and continues chronologically to the 1920s. Our emphasis, of course, is on the period around the 1900s and on Prohibition Park, the original name for this area. Quoting from a few lines in the dedication of Vicky's book, "Come with us aboard the number 12 trolley to Prohibition Park, picnic in the Pleasure Grove, or dine at the Park Hotel. Listen to a stimulating lecture at the 5,000-seat auditorium, or ride in young Elizabeth Kuyper's pony cart as she delivers horseradish and dairy products for her parents' farm. We know you will enjoy it." We begin with the oldest house in Westerleigh, a pre-American Revolution home. A front view of the Houseman homestead on St. John Avenue, the only New York City or New York State landmark in the town. The original section to the right was built around 1730, the addition about 1760. The founders of the Prohibition Park Company purchased 25 acres of mostly wooded land that until then was part of the Houseman lands, to be used as the summer headquarters for the National Prohibition Park Company. Reverend Boole and his family lived here for a while until their home on Jewett Avenue was completed. Dr. William H. Boole, a Methodist minister, founded Prohibition Park with associates along the lines of Ocean Grove, New Jersey. His wife Ella A. Boole later became president of the National Women's Temperance Union. This section of the original 1.5-story wing, nearly square in shape, is now at the northern end of the house. It was built as a one-room house with a loft above. The walls are made of fieldstone, laid at random and painted white. There is one low door and one small window on the front, while the whole northern end is taken up by the immense stone chimney. The interior of the original section. Notice the ceiling beams. This had been used as the main living quarters, but was used in 1983 as the dining room. The 1760 addition with dental molding around the top of the cupboards and mantel. Notice the outward bend of the fireplace bricks to direct the heat outward into the room and probably burn better. This is the original stairway of the 1760 addition. Notice the square section newel and hand-turned balustrades. This second-floor hall joins the older and newer parts of the house. The loft of the original wing is used as the master bedroom. Notice the thickness of the stone walls and exposed structural beams holding up the roof. A southern view of the house and one wall of the brook that runs through the property. The brook, known as Palmer's Run, was subsequently rerouted and covered when a storm system was installed along Watchog Road in 1988. The Jewett Mansion, 200 Kingsley Avenue, named for the Jewett family, as was Jewett Avenue. John Jewett and his brothers Charles and George had established a paint factory known as the Jewett White Lead Company in Port Richmond in 1842, and later the Linseed Oil Company. The state census of 1865 lists Mary Jewett, 45, and son Orville, 25, and 3 servants as occupants. Mary's husband John had died 9 years before, and in 1890 she sold her entire estate, stretching from Kingsley Avenue down to the Khyber Farm, bordered by Jewett Avenue and Manor Road, to the Prohibition Park Company, to be divided up into lots and new streets. Prohibition Park was growing by leaps and bounds. Jewett Avenue had originally been called Pond Road because of the huge ponds near Myers Corners at one end and another pond at the bottom of Palmer's Run at Richmond Terrace at the other. All of those ponds have since been filled in. This mansion of a house once had a porch and entrance which faced downhill to the west, looked out onto a curved driveway and rolling hill. Kingsley Avenue curves here because the house was there first, squarely in the path of the road, so they curved the road around it. The house was built before the Civil War. A section of the Jewett estate on what is now College Avenue and New York Place was set aside for the Westerleigh Collegiate Institute, from which one source of the name of Westerleigh. It is said that they wanted to call it Westerleigh because it faced the westerly direction of the setting sun. The post office at that time rejected the spelling because there was a Westerleigh in Rhode Island and still is. The Reverend Charles R. Kingsley, the first pastor of Emmanuel Union Church, and his wife, Florence Morse Kingsley, a popular novelist of the time, and their 5 children lived there for about 40 years. The street Kingsley Avenue was named in their honor. Here is the cover of Our Heritage by John Pollock, Jr., a 1960 history of Emmanuel Union Church, Westerleigh. The center structure is the original one of 1895, then called the Deems Memorial Chapel. The lower left, 1916, with the addition of the new entrance and the tower, and the 1957 edition at the upper right. An exterior view of the Deems Memorial Chapel today. Christian Endeavor windows. Windows say for Christ and the Church. The Christian Endeavor organization started the church to meet the spiritual needs of a multi-denominational community. A view of the church office window. A detail of the chapel windows. The entrance to the church as it exists today. In 1916, James Whitford II designed the main sanctuary. Later, as the congregation grew, his son James Whitford III redesigned the interior. He changed the altar, the placement of the pews, and broke through the wall space between the chapel and the sanctuary with movable memorial doors, which presently divide the Deems Chapel from the main sanctuary. The doors were a gift in memory of his parents. His wife Margaret presented another pair of memorial doors leading from the vestibule to the sanctuary in memory of her mother. The full-height bell tower at the entrance was covered in 1957 to allow placement of the carillon heard throughout the year. James Whitford III also designed the new auditorium gymnasium, which was dedicated at a dinner on September 9, 1956. This is a view of the entire building complex. The original Boole residence at 682 Jewett Avenue, where Sunday school was started. The first deed owner was Mrs. Sabrina Meerschaum in Pennsylvania, January 13, 1893. The Pleasure Grove, later called Westerleigh Park, at the corner of Main and Willard Avenues. The park was originally 15 acres and was scaled back to 3 acres around 1900. The grove originally extended to Lathrop Avenue at one end, where stables were there for residents and guests, and a bowling alley. On July 4, 1922, medals were awarded to Wilbur and Alfred Landau. The first was for broad jump, the other for running the same year. The medals were presented on behalf of Mayor Hyland at the July 4th event in Westerleigh Park. These awards preceded other awards given for Best Costume and Best Decorated Bicycle in the July 4th parade sponsored by the Westerleigh Improvement Society. This view shows where the original spring was located and the Victorian gazebo. It was because of the excellent available drinking water the Prohibition Park founders chose this area. Spring water poured continuously from a pipe here, and residents came to fill their pails. The bare brown area in the upper center of the photo is where the spring is located. To the left is our present-day bandstand, erected in 1923. Previous to this date, the band had to play on portable bandstands with planks across wooden horses every Thursday night. The boulevard looking west from Jewett Avenue to the original site of the auditorium, which was between Fisk and Willard Avenues. It was destroyed by fire in 1903. One Westerleigh lady Vicky spoke to said her grandmother remembered walking along the wooden sidewalks of Westerleigh at night to attend a meeting at the auditorium, carrying a kerosene lantern to light the way. It is difficult to imagine Westerleigh without its streetlights, telephone poles, and incidentally there was only one telephone in all of Westerleigh, and it was located in the auditorium. 1893, 708 Jewett Avenue, a year-round house of the period in typical Queen Anne style. Notice the gabled windows, the turret, gabled roof, second floor porch, small porch under the turret, on the third floor. The first deed was to Mrs. Maggie Griffin from Prohibition Park, September 27, 1892. Many people who came to Prohibition Park when it was Prohibition Campground Association camped here for the summer in tents mounted on wooden platforms. Later, some of these people had year-round homes built on or close to Jewett Avenue for more convenience and being closer to transportation. 1893, 712 Jewett Avenue, first deed to Willis Gillette, New York State. 1907, 692 Jewett Avenue. 1898, 11 Woodbridge Place. This picture was taken from the site of the Grove Hotel, which was on Willard Avenue across from the park. The hotel later became an apartment house and was taken down in the late 1930s or early 1940s. Another view of 11 Woodbridge Place. Urban Martin was the first owner. Public School 30, the site of the original Park Hotel between Fisk and Wardwell Avenues. PS 30's main entrance was on Boulevard. The Westerleigh Improvement Society was instrumental in getting the City of New York to build a school here. This building was completed in 1905. The original Park Hotel could accommodate 500 people in the dining room and had 69 guest rooms for sleeping. The girls' entrance. Now that we have lady fire persons, lady police persons, even lady motor persons on the subways, it's interesting to see separate entrances. The boys' entrance. This portion of PS 30 was added in 1928, and this entrance on Wardwell Avenue was used as the entrance for residents to enter to vote. Westerleigh Savings and Loan, designed by James Whitford II. This building dates back to 1923 and was of red brick. The entrance was renovated in 1973. Columns and portico were added and bricks were painted white with brown trim. Its original name was the Prohibition Park Building Loan and Savings Association. Organized in 1892 by Hiram C. Horton, prominent in the founding of both Prohibition Park Community and Emmanuel Union Church, the bank met the financial needs of a growing community, especially in its granting of mortgage loans, which it is still doing today. The first building was of 2 stories, with the bank downstairs and Mr. Horton's real estate office upstairs. It was situated where the flagpole is now. The original stone wall segment of the now demolished Haynes homestead and estate. It was on Jewett Avenue across from the bank. It was said the Haynes family were the leaders of Westerleigh society, and anyone invited to their parties had socially arrived. This view shows the number 12 trolley on Jewett Avenue with the Haynes home to the right of the photo. The Khyber homestead, built in 1882. This, of course, preceded the building up of Prohibition Park by at least 6 years. Notice the Carpenter Gothic detailing around the peak of the roof and the shutters on the windows. This and the next 10 photos of the Khyber farm are reproductions taken from the original Khyber family album by Mr. William Shawkoff, president of the Westerleigh Improvement Society in 1983, at the home of the late Mrs. William Schneider, a Khyber granddaughter. An earlier photo showing the porch before it was closed in. Farmer George Khyber's mother and father, Magdalena and Conrad Khyber. George and Margaret Khyber. Their farm was 11 acres, stretching along Jewett Avenue from what is now Constant Avenue to Margaretta Court and east almost to Westcott Boulevard. Margaretta Court was named for George's wife, Margaret. A Khyber family portrait. Not all of the children were present. There had been 12 children, 11 reaching maturity. The 3 generations of Margarets, Mrs. George Khyber, her daughter, Margaret Khyber Lutz, and her daughter, Margaret Lutz. George Khyber with a hard-working farm horse which was called a cob. The farm and buildings from a side view. To the left is the homestead. The building with the long roof next to it is the former gymnasium building of the Westerleigh Collegiate Institute, which had not been damaged by the fire that had destroyed the school. Mr. Khyber had it moved to his property and rented it out as a community ballroom. There were also square dances there, roller skating and dancing lessons, and basketball games. Part of it was used as a dormitory for the Khyber sons as they grew older, while the daughters remained in the main house. One of the extremely successful enterprises of the Khyber farm was a horseradish business. Mr. Khyber gave it to his son Frederick as a wedding present. This Frederick is the father of Dr. Fred Khyber, whom some may remember as practicing medicine at 793 Jewett Avenue. The horseradish business was eventually sold to Gold's Prepared Horseradish, still prepared in exactly the same way, all natural, no preservatives. Khyber's orchard, for which he was famous. There were Macintosh apples, Bartlett and Kiefer pears, a variety of peaches including Albertas, 3 kinds of cherries, quince, persimmon, and mulberries. With such a large family, they were built-in helpers, with everyone working very industriously and with the use of the latest scientific methods of the day and a little bit of luck. The farm prospered beyond Mr. Khyber's fondest dreams. This was Mr. Khyber's entry in the Richmond County Fair in Dongan Hills, where the Berry homes are now located. He formed the American flag with colored rows of vegetables from the garden, and he won first prize that year. His surplus garden products were sold to many of the residents of the growing Prohibition Park. Of course, much of the fruit and vegetables of the farm were put up for the long, cold winters to help feed the large Khyber family. 196 Constant Avenue, near Ohio Place today. The homestead was eventually moved to Constant Avenue and was encased in aluminum siding and the porch removed. It is all that remains of the Khyber farm except for some peach trees that are still standing on former Khyber land that had been subdivided for many attractive homes along Constant Avenue and Margaretta Court and Khyber Court. This homestead has since been torn down and replaced with duplex homes. 272 Fisk Avenue, built around 1890 for I.K. Funk, treasurer of the Prohibition Park Company, founder of the Literary Digest, president of Funk and Wagnall's Publishing Company, and editor of that company's standard dictionary of the English language. He also served as publicist for the Prohibition Park Company when the Prohibition Party had candidates such as Neil Dow, Fisk, Woolley, and Bidwell running for president of this country in the late 1800s. They all had streets in the area named for them. This house was lovingly restored to its original elegance in 1983 by the owners over a period of 10 years after it had been used and abused by its former occupants. Every plaster wall and ceiling and every wooden door had to be replaced. Notice the outside of the turret. This is the interior of the turret. Mr. and Mrs. Michael Moschella, owners in 1983, kindly allowed us to photograph the interior of some of their rooms. Here we see the living room fireplace. A Vermont stove. This stove and another one burning coal and wood heated this home for the previous few winters, although it had a central heating system. Semicircular windows on the first floor formed by the lower portion of the turret structure. A built-in dining room corner cabinet. The dining room French door is behind the curtains leading out to the porch. Notice the rectangularly shaped angled wall at the right. The French doors with the curtains drawn aside. A reproduction of a cast iron Uncle Sam bank, popular during the Civil War period. The arm drops the coin into a red pocketbook. We could not resist trying it, and it worked. Bluestone, number 42 Boulevard, built in 1893. Children in the neighborhood still refer to it as the castle. Made of Warsaw bluestone, front porch columns of dressed New Hampshire granite, built by Frank Burt of West Virginia. He had been in the leather business, had struck it rich in oil on his farm down there. He subsequently ran for governor of West Virginia on the Prohibition ticket. He moved north late with his wife, Mary, to be part of the Prohibition Park experiment in its high moral and spiritual environment. Notice the Richardsonian arch over the doorway, architecturally ahead of its time for this area. It was later the home of Jim Davidson of the Staten Island shipyards. A close-up of the arch and the entrance. This photo shows the fireplace in the entrance foyer. This divider separates the entrance foyer from the stair hall. We are grateful to Mr. and Mrs. Tony DeMarco, owners in 1983, for permitting us to take these and the following photos inside their home. This round window is an unusual detail. Notice the stained glass in the corners. Notice the details around these windows where the upper corners are rounded. The wreath and swag detail is typical throughout. This unusual newel post fits the grand scale of this beautiful home. This stairway leads to an intermediate landing with stained glass windows and then to the second floor. This is the stained glass window at the intermediate level. The dining room is the only room where the oak wainscoting and trim have been painted. Notice how the wreaths and flower buds have been accented with paint over the fireplace. The wreath detail is carried throughout to these windows in the music room. The large kitchen is scaled to handle the large parties which were customary for some of the residents of this beautiful home. This is the location of the original cooking hearth. There was probably a coal stove here at one time. 6 and 8 Boulevard, also built in 1893 for Benjamin F. Funk, managing editor of the first Funk and Wagnall's dictionary. He brought his family here from Springfield, Ohio. It has now been made into at least 4 apartments. 92 Waters Avenue, built in 1898. This was the second house that Edwin Markham and his family lived in on Waters Avenue, where they lived for almost 40 years, coming from California after the success of his poem, The Man with the Hoe. There were many literary gatherings here on Sunday afternoons, and the poet often stood on his front lawn reciting his poetry to the neighbors and others from as far away as West Brighton, who would stand on the edge of the lawn facing him. The owners in 1983 worked hard at restoring inside and out, including stripping paint from the woodwork. The dining room door has revealed a lovely burl grain. This large living room occupies the main portion of the western side of the house. It was the scene of many literary gatherings. The room is symmetrical. This arch, which you see at the rear of the room, is repeated at the front of the room along the same wall. In 1983, the house was in the process of restoration. This beautiful mahogany door has had several layers of paint removed and still requires some finishing touches. Notice the beautiful burl wood and the molding details. This photo shows the lovely dining room. Here we see the original cooking hearth. We are grateful to the 1983 owners, Mr. and Mrs. Saul, for the privilege of photographing these interior views. This wall has been covered with plaster, and it was discovered by the owners and is now being restored. A side view of the house during the 1983 renovation. A rear view of the Markham house during the 1983 renovation. 68 Waters Avenue, built in 1898, which has since been torn down. Notice the porches on the second and third floors. 162 Waters Avenue, in 1983, owned by the Olson family. A closer view of the Olson home. Exterior view of 115 Willard Avenue, built in 1898. Notice the half-moon design in the shutters. Although the bay windows were added later, they were completely in keeping with the rest of the house, adding interest to its design as well as increasing its space. This home has been significantly changed since the original presentation. Mr. and Mrs. Geisler, the 1983 owners, in their dining room. Now the site of the Westerleigh Deli at Main and Wardwell Avenues. This building had been the headquarters of Mr. Missel, plumbing contractor for most of the new homes going up in Prohibition Park around the early 1900s and later. This is one of the only few business establishments permitted in the community. The other was a grocery store at Jewett and Waters Avenues, also a very old building. 720 Jewett Avenue, built about 1910. The 1983 owners were Mr. and Mrs. Monfort. They first saw the house, which was up for sale, in 1966. Since it had only 4 rooms downstairs and they were looking for separate bedrooms for their young son and daughter, and there was a rental apartment on the second floor, they did not take it. They moved to New Jersey, came back 2 years later to find the house was still up for sale. This time around, a back staircase that had been blocked off was found just outside the kitchen. They were able to bypass the second floor apartment and use 2 of the 3 third-floor bedrooms as children's bedrooms. So they purchased the house, and the children reached their own private quarters by using the back stairs to the second floor plus another flight of stairs just above to the third floor. A closer view, notice the curved porch windows. Stained glass windows of the exterior view. Interior of the curved entrance hall with stained glass windows. Mrs. Montfort posing near the curved newel post. The fireplace in the entrance hall. The original ceiling detail of the living room. This had been used as the dining room. The decoration at the corner of the parquet floor. 726 Jewett Avenue. Although not very old, it is a charming reproduction of a colonial house, owned in 1983 by the McKay family. A front and side view. 726 Jewett Avenue as it looks today. 250 College Avenue, former home of Mr. and Mrs. Kindlin of Kindlin Drake, naval architects, who designed the 6-boat ferry fleet, 3 oil and 3 diesel, before the superboats, and would ask neighbors for suggestions in design. We believe this is one of 3 houses designed by James Whitford II on the site of the former dormitory of the Westerleigh Collegiate Institute. A side view of 250 College Avenue. Spring flowers along Deems Avenue. 220 Deems Avenue, built in 1907. Glass enclosed porch. Notice the decorated columns. 260 St. John Avenue, built by O.O. Odegaard, architect and builder. Notice the stone columns. A side view of 260 St. John Avenue. 208 Neildow Avenue, designed by Ernest Flagg of Staten Island serpentinite. Notice the varied colors of the stone. The exterior walls were formed by placing wooden forms, pouring in mixed stone and concrete. When they hardened, placing the forms above, continuing the process. A larger detail of the stone. In other words, this is a structural stone wall, not stone veneer as are many of the newer homes. 250 Dickey Avenue, interesting early octagonally shaped house in Lower Westerleigh. 11 Woodbridge Place, Chinese Chippendale style railing and decoration below the porch roof, photographed by the late Fred Barrack, Vicky's husband. A rear view of the same house in the big snowfall of February 1983. Notice the rounded top newel post. Looking up Woodbridge Place after the same big snowstorm. A California-style house at 151 Fisk Avenue, directly facing Woodbridge Place, home of the Tyson family, built in 1910. Looking down Willard Avenue in the snow, railing of the Westerleigh Park at Willard and Main Avenues. In the early 1900s and before, the Westerleigh Improvement Society had the responsibility for letting out the snow removal contracts. They went to Mr. Codd, father of the former police commissioner, for his horse-drawn plows, and we may be sure that every street was taken care of. We close with another look at Susan Bavaro's sketch of the bandstand and Westerleigh Park as it looked in 1983, prior to its reconstruction in 1990.